This lecture is Play Like a Pro. And today I'm not going to necessarily show games of pro players, but I'm going to show openings and why they're not common at the professional level. And also show like a lot of amateur openings which are either refuted or close to refuted, a lot of gambits that you guys might enjoy playing, and show basically what a professional would do against them. Okay, so hopefully that sounds fun. If you guys have like any openings you want to focus on, any like really annoying gambits that you face, I know you mentioned King's Gambit, which maybe at some point I can give recommendation for black. Anything else come to mind? Elephant Gambit. Let me ask you guys, so what do you guys play against e4? It's just French, right? French? E5, okay. That's actually good, because I have a few different French lines, and I have a few different E4, E5 lines. The what? The max line, okay. Fair enough. I'm going to go in order here. And for this lecture, like the openings that I go over, they're openings that you could potentially play if you know your opponent plays a specific opening. If you know your opponent plays like the Danish Gambit or the Goring Gambit, then listen closely, because that's what I'm going to cover first. Now, the Danish Gambit, it's very popular opening among lower level players. Yeah. It's maybe even like the first opening that many players learn, where it's essentially the idea is to give away not just one pawn, but two pawns to get a position like this with very much accelerated development and two bishops, open position. And this can be something that black will struggle against at like the lower levels. So I would like to show my recommendation. Like if I were to play a tournament tomorrow and I play e4, e5 as black, I'll show what I would do against it. Going back here to the position after c3, I do not accept the gambit. I play a line which prioritizes development and piece activity. And I can highly recommend playing this move, pawn d5. What this does, it pretty much forces white to take. And then we take with queen. And even though the queen's coming out early, white doesn't have knight c3 immediately. And there's many ways for black to maintain the queen in the center while bringing in the other pieces with initiative. So usually white will take on d4. And we can play knight c6, attacking the pawn. White will usually defend with knight f3. And we can continue developing with attack, bishop g4. Now already this looks nice for black. Now I will say a lot of players who play like the Danish Gambit will be happy going into this line, because there's a pretty famous trap from this position where white has a very sneaky move, bishop e2. And the point of this move is that it looks like black can win a pawn, but if black tries to win the pawn, he'll be severely punished. So let's imagine bishop take f3, bishop take f3, queen take d4. Why is this terrible for black? Yeah. Yes. Yeah, bishop takes c6, removal of the guard. This comes with check, and black is losing the queen next move. So if you go into this line as black, don't take on f3 and then take on d4. That's one way to lose really quickly. So instead, black can just continue developing and play this move, bishop b4. Nice move, forcing white to block. White will usually play knight c3. Now black still has to be accurate here, because white does inherently have more space with the d-pawn. And white's ready to castle, and then after castling, the pin will be no longer existing, and then the queen will be attacked. So there's a very specific way that if you play this line, you should know up until this point, and also know a few moves further down the line. Best move for black in this position may look counterintuitive, especially with what we just saw, but best move is bishop take f3. And after bishop take f3, again, we can't take on d4 because of bishop takes c6, but we have a very powerful square for the queen. So black to move here, where should the queen go? Yes. Queen c4. This is very nice opening preparation. And after queen c4, we're not winning the pawn, but we're applying a lot of pressure. We're also preventing white from castling. So this king is stuck in the center. We have threats of both bishop takes c3, and also knight take d4. And if white doesn't play precisely here, then white can get a worse position very easily. Now, the most precise way for white to play is to first capture on c6, remove the knight. Let me ask you guys, would you take with the pawn or with the queen? Take with pawn? What do you guys think? First impression? Queen? So 2 votes for pawn, 1 vote for queen. The best move is actually to take with a pawn. Even though this is allowing double pawns, we want the queen to be on c4 to prevent white from castling. And we'll see later on in the game that these double pawns aren't that weak because white won't have too many ways to attack them, and they're very easily defended. And white's still under pressure here because queen on c4 is very annoying. The threat is still bishop take d3, or bishop take c3. And if a move like bishop d2 is played, that would lose d4. So white's best option usually is to play queen e2 to just initiate the queen trade. And then black should be happy taking on e2 and then queenside castling. Now, this might not seem like the most exciting line because a lot of pieces got traded very early on and it just seems kind of like a balanced position. But this is actually a very nice position for black, and there's a lot of potential to outplay white in this sort of queenless middle game, where essentially black has a very clear target, the isolated pawn on d4. And black has a way to attack the pawn with all the different pieces. And just to illustrate the setup here that black would like to go for, usually the knight should go to f5 via e7. The bishop can drop back to b6. And the rooks can quite often double up on the d file. And then there would be there would be already 4 attackers if black achieves that setup. And also, if there's any potential pin along the d file, which could happen quite often, then c5 could be a resource as well. Additionally, these pawns on actually all of the queenside pawns are very easily defended, not only with this rook d6 move, but also with king b7. So if you get to this position and just remember where your pieces should go, I think black has very good chances to outplay white. I played this line once before in a tournament game many years ago. It was back in high school. And I played it against a player who had like a very aggressive style. Like he likes to have attacking positions with queens on the board. And this is usually the style of most Danish Gambit players, where they want to be attacking early on. So if you can find some opening preparation like this, which neutralizes a position and kind of goes against their style, it can be very powerful. So hopefully that makes sense to everyone. If anyone wants to look into this further, you can find games in ChessBase. We just click search here in the database. There's been over 200 games played from this position, and black has a pretty good score. What's that? Also Lee Chess, yeah. Yeah, so I'm using ChessBase for this lecture. If we were on Lee Chess, we could just go into the Masters database or the Lee Chess database. But one thing that actually like kind of sticks out in this position, and maybe you can see the rating differential. Like black I've sorted by black rating, but we can see like the top black players are usually playing much lower rated white players. So yeah, I wanted to make one more point here, that if we go back to the start, we saw the Danish Gambit with d4 immediately. The Goring Gambit is when white plays knight f3 first, and then plays d4. And then after e take d4, white can play c3. And this is the start of the Goring Gambit. And again, I mean, you could accept the Gambit, but I would recommend playing d5 here. And this should lead to just a direct transposition. If white takes, we take, pawn takes, bishop g4, it's the same position we had before. So it makes sense. Do you find this useful, being the only e5 player here? So you could run into this. Okay. Yeah, if you always take, then this is a nice way to mix things up. So let's move on. I'll try and get some variety, given that I have a few more e4, e5 lines, but we'll try and be fair and balanced, and we'll take a look at a French gambit. Yeah. If you're a French player, you should at least know what the Milner-Berry is, and you should know some extent to how to deal with it. It can be a very, very dangerous opening if you're not prepared. Yeah, it's a type of opening, like if you're not prepared, you can run into trouble like very early, but if you're well prepared, you should get a better position from the opening. So French defense, we'll see one of the most common variations, at least to start with, the advanced variation, pawn e5. And of course, the idea of the French is to try and break down White's pawn center. White plays c3, knight c6. This is all very standard. White will usually play knight f3. One quick test for you guys. Bishop e5 is a move that will be played by a lot of amateurs because it looks like a pin, and I guess sometimes people like pins. In this case, it's not such a great move because black has a simple response, bishop d7. And then after knight f3, black is actually winning a pawn. It's a very well-known tactic here. Yeah, both of you. What is it? Yeah, knight take e5. Just a classic French tactic. Given that this bishop's undefended, if white takes back on e5, we take on b5. And if bishop take d7, we take back with the knight. It's a free pawn. So that's useful to know. White will usually play knight f3, queen b6, main line. And now the start of the Milner-Berry, the start of the Milner-Berry is when white plays bishop to d3. And this is a sneaky move because it looks like white's leaving the pawn undefended right away on d4. Of course, black can't take this pawn, even though there's what, 3 attackers and there's 2 defenders. If black takes. If you say takes too many times in a row, it sounds like steak, and then I get hungry. But anyway, after queen take d4, white to move.
Check.
Yeah, bishop e5. Simple tactics. So the pawn is defended by tactics, essentially. However, when white plays bishop d3, usually the intention will be to sacrifice the pawn. And the best move for black here is to take first, and then play bishop d7. And now what we're doing, we're blocking the future bishop e5 check, and now we are threatening to take the pawn on d4. So the Milner-Berry is when white castles.
Yeah.
I will say that a lot of players will kind of walk into this position unknowingly as white, and just like, so far white's just played natural moves. And then they'll realize here that their pawn is in danger, and then they'll start trying to defend the pawn. But it turns out white has no great way to hold on to the pawn. Like if bishop e3, then b2 hangs, right? And if bishop c2, there's a nice move for black in this position. Anyone? Yeah? Knight b4, very strong. Essentially, not really focusing on the pawn anymore, but focusing on this bishop.